So, welcome to panel 7. My name is Samim Akgönül. First of all, allow me to thank Hrant Dink Foundation and congratulate them for this wonderful conference. Mehmet, Teni, and Katya, they really worked a lot for me to be here, and I'd like to thank them personally for everything. We will be talking about minorities at the margins. Um, in 2015, um, a French Roman director, Tony Gottlieb, in the screening of his film, the cultural the Minister of Culture said, "We'd like to thank you for um, for showing us the France at the margins." And Tony Gottlieb said at the premiere, "Mr. Minister, we are at the center, whereas you are at the margins." And yes, I remember his name, but I do not remember the name of the Minister of Culture. So it seems as if Tony Gottlieb was right. So this concept of margins is something that needs to be considered with great attention. We have three speakers in our midst. The first one will be talking about the Roma policy in Turkey, and this will be a duet, so to speak. Pınar Sayan, I guess she's joining us online. She teaches at Beykoz University at the Department of International Relations, and she's a researcher as well. And previously, she visited as a visiting scholar Cambridge University, Stockholm University, Royal Wallenberg Institute, and she was also the director of the Imagine Center for Conflict Transformation, and she was an editor of Caucasus edition of Journal of Conflict Transformation. And at Columbia University, she was part of the Alliance for Historic Dialogue program. She focuses on conflict resolution, human rights, minority rights, and so on. And she also focuses on nationalism in European politics, building of peace, and the role of local and international actors in conflict resolution. She's also joined by Elmas Köçkün. We are also joined by her, and she's a trainer at a community center in Izmir. She studied history at Uşak University, and her thesis is based on the Roma population during the Greek population exchange with Greece, and she focuses on the history of the Roma as well. We'd like to thank both our speakers, and I think Pınar is going to start first, and then Elmas is going to take the floor. Over to you, Pınar. Hello, and thank you. Now, today with Elmas, we will be presenting to you the work that we have been carrying out for the last couple of years. We will be looking at the Roma policy in Turkey, but let me tell you a few things about what this concept entails and how it's interlinked with what is going on in Europe. The Roma are present on all European nations, and wider Europe, that is to say, in Caucasus, in Russia, and so on and so forth. And obviously, they are called Manush, Sintis, Kaldia, Gypsy, depending on the country that they are in. They have similarities between themselves as well as differences as well. The most common similarity is culture, the way of life, and language. The biggest difference is usually sect related, religion related, and again, linguistic differences. When we look at the Roma in Europe, the number is around 15 million. From that point of view, I think they are the biggest minority in Europe today. But when we look at it, we see that in every country that they live in, they are always one of the most disadvantaged groups in the countries that they live in. And this has been a historic fact. This has been going on for years in the Russian Empire, Ottoman Empire. Relatively speaking, maybe they had better conditions, some groups at least. But when we look at it, we see that there's a structural and corporate discrimination against the Roma, and there's violence that is inflicted on them as well. There are extreme examples, such as up until the mid 19th century, the Roma were slaves, and Holocaust also targeted the Roma, and this was not acknowledged for a long time in Czech Republic. Up until the 1000, Roma women were forcefully sterilized, and the Roma after the Second World War, especially, started a Roma civil rights movement, and they had certain demands. They started to organize, and especially this was quite strong in Germany up until the 80s. The courts in Germany turned down any demand for restitution, but then there was a congress that was organized, and they wanted to adopt the name Roma, and it means human in Romanesque language. And these people sort of decide to use this word rather than derogatory terms. There are so many different terminologies in the literature. That's why we use the word the Roma or the Roman. Now, when we come to Turkey, from a historic point of view, the Roma, a vast majority lived under the Ottoman Empire, and after the founding of the Republic, Turkey became the country with the highest number of Roma people. We don't know the exact numbers today in Turkey, but we're guessing that there might be up to 5 million Roma in Turkey. So what are the different groups in Turkey? And all of this is based on observation, but let me share some insights with you. In Turkey, Rom, Dom, Abdal, these are the three separate groups. Roms are usually in the west of the country, in Marmara, in the Black Sea region, Aegean coast. Loms are eastern Black Sea, and Abdals live in the mainland Anatolia. Roms and Doms, they have their own, they have their own language as well that is quite similar to one another. So we use that phraseology for them, but of course every individual may decide to or wish to define themselves with different phraseologies. A Dom may not see themselves as Roman, and so on and so forth. And Turkey, the Roma are not recognized as an official minority, but I've been working in this area for 10 years, and my observations, Elmas's observations, attest to the fact that they do not see themselves as a minority either. And most of the time they say, we were brought in by Atatürk. We're an essential component of this nation. I'm a Turk first, a Muslim first, and then Roma. So the word minority is usually associated with non-Muslim populations and sometimes with separatism. That is why they distance themselves from the word minority. The Roma today are scattered all across Turkey, but they are beset by social ostracization and many problems. And here's our argument. We look at state policies and we see that either the state is sort of trying to get them to toe the line or remain indifferent to them. And there are three periods that we need to focus on. Elmas is the historian in our team, so she's going to tell you about the early Republican period, and then I will tell you about how things change in the 2000s. So Elmas, over to you. Thank you. This is Elmas, and actually, there will be a bit of a repetition during this presentation. Just like Pınar said, I will be focusing on late Ottoman period and early Republican period. Roma, they're the largest minority group in Europe for centuries. They also lived within the Ottoman Empire, and once the empire came to an end, the republic was founded, and as such, the Roma became one of the biggest minorities in Turkey. But from a historic point of view, in order for us to understand Turkey's Roma policy, first of all, we need to take a look at the Roma policy of the Ottoman Empire. In the Ottoman Empire, the Roma usually in their state documents, it said gypsy or Kupti, and the etymology of these words is another debate entirely. And in our article, we gave some information, but today we're not going to particularly focus on that. Roman communities have different names, and Manush, Sinti, Kalu, Kalderash, Mıtrı, Peripatati, Abdal, Poşak, Karachi, and so on and so forth. And these are names, pejorative names given by the dominant quarters of the society, such as gypsy. But in our work, we use the word Roman because Romanesque speaking people define themselves as Roma, Romni, and this means human or man. And also in 71, there was a Roman Congress, and again, a decision made there um, um, is reason for us to use this phraseology. Now, Roma in Turkey, they can be described as a minority, obviously, but the Republic of Turkey, just like the Ottoman state, in line with the Lausanne Treaty, only recognizes as minorities non-Muslim populations, and as such, Gypsies, Romans, do not have the status of being minorities, and certain Roma people do not like the association of the word minority. That's why they shun that phraseology. They define themselves as Turks first, and then Muslims, and then Roma. That's how they usually do it. And let's take a look at the Roman policies of the Ottoman Empire. In the Ottoman archives, we see that there are thousands of documents pertaining to the Roma community, but for the purposes of our conference, we wanted to look at certain documents that give us an inkling about the state policy. And to prevent the immigration of Roma, there are certain decrees and certain tax regulations, and we wanted to take a look at those. The Ottomans usually precluded the Roma from migrating from one place to another because nomads cannot pay taxes. It's difficult to tax nomads, so that's why they wanted to prevent them from immigrating from one place to another. And also, for them to be economically viable, they had to settle down and they had to pay their taxes. And just an example, in the 15th and 16th centuries, the Roma are actually registered as Christians, but this changed over the next couple of centuries. The Roma adopted Islam, and they became Muslims and registered as Muslims. And the Ottoman Empire does not allow Christian Roma and Muslim Roma to live together. Muslim Roma living with Christians had to pay a haraj tax, which is only usually paid by the non-Muslims in the Ottoman Empire. And actually, the political status of the Ottoman Empire shaped the policies of the state vis-a-vis the Roma. And after the Balkan Wars, for instance, Turkishness was adopted. The concept of Turkishness was adopted, and at that time, the Ottoman state was trying to send minorities abroad, and also received immigration from the territories lost. So this mutual wave of immigration culminated in the 1913 Istanbul Agreement between Istanbul and the Ottoman Empire, and this was a voluntary population exchange. And after this agreement, certain Roma groups wanted to come to Anatolia, but the state labeled them as non-Muslim gypsies and prevented them from entering the country. And in the final period of the Ottoman Empire, we have also the legislation on settlements. Congress of Union and Progress (CUP) introduced this legislation, and it's important to know about this because in the first part of this, there's a list of people who shall not be allowed to enter the country, such as people with leprosy, physically impaired people, beggars, anarchists, and gypsies, for instance, in the list. So all in all, the CUP government wanted to ban the entry of these quote-unquote problematic groups or people, and these are not allowed entry into the country. But let's also talk about the early years of the Republic, shall we? The newly established Republic of Turkey also had some documents that pertain to population and immigration. And in 23, there was a population exchange agreement and protocol, and the Roma were actually included in this population exchange. And as far as Turkey is concerned, the fact that the Roma are included in the population exchange was because, because of the insufficiency of the population in Turkey, and secondly, the incoming people could always be put to use as labor, and also these Roma were Muslims. Um, and these people were registered as Kıpti in the official documents, and after the population exchange, in correspondences and in state records, in petitions, there are certain problems that are mentioned that Roma people experience, such as not being able to settle down, unemployment, and sort of fleeing the region where they are put. And yet another document that we looked at was the, again, settlement legislation and minutes of meetings in the parliament. Again, these include discriminatory language about the Roma. I do not wish to take too much of your time because Pınar is going to complete what I have started. So both the Ottoman Empire and the Republic of Turkey always questioned the nature of the Roma, and they saw the Roma groups as people who can be manipulated, who can be put to use due to according to certain wishes. And there are three types of policies: ignoring them, shaping them, and putting them to use. I mean, these are the three categories that we have observed throughout history. So over to you. Thank you, Elmas. And actually, let's now move to year 2000 and beyond. This may look like a giant leap, but in this intermediary period, there was not a systematic state policy. But after the 2000s, again, in line with EU accession talks, certain things started to change, and I will get to that. But before that, let me tell you what we mean by problems of the Roma. Starting with the 2000s, we started to witness academic studies, and there was more awareness about what these communities experienced. And one thing that needs to be outlined is as follows: after decades of policies of settlement, this did actually happen in Turkey. But these people live in ghettos or in temporary dwellings, and these dwellings are sometimes concrete, whereas sometimes they're like shacks made out of metal and cardboard. And in these dwellings, in these Roman neighborhoods, you don't have utilities like sewage, electricity, water, or public transportation. I mean, these are infrastructure problems that they experience all the time. And also there are environmental risk factors such as polluted water reserves or settlements near landfill area. And in addition to these unregistered dwellings, registered ones are expropriated, and many of these places are dealt with in the framework of urban transformation. And the dwellers in these areas are pushed out of the city. Sometimes buildings built for them it does not suit them. An example is Sulukule. In 2006, an urban transformation decision was made, and there was a huge resistance, but the destruction of Sulukule could not be prevented. And so these Roma communities were expelled from the neighborhood of Sulukule. And of course, you have implications of this in education. You have Roman neighborhoods and Roman schools. Maybe you've heard about them too. And many studies reveal that these schools, the physical infrastructure of these schools, are not sufficient. On top of that, the education quality is low, and teachers do not want to work in these schools. And in many of these schools, you have 100% Roman population in terms of pupils, and there's a lot of truancy and low levels of participation due to discrimination. And many Roma people collect scraps or paper. Some are florists, some are musicians. These are precarious jobs, low-income jobs. And in addition to those, some make baskets, and some work with tin. Some of these jobs are becoming increasingly unneeded in today's society, and many of these people are subjected to discrimination. Especially after the pandemic, we have seen a deepening of the problems that the Roma face. And as a result, there is this deep poverty that these people found themselves in. In terms of healthcare, I think there has been an improvement. In terms of access, there has been some improvement, but due to environmental factors, due to the fact that they have heating problems, clean water problems, and discrimination they face, and for women, problems such as multiple pregnancy actually affects the populations negatively, and pogrom and lynches, these are at the extreme end of the spectrum perhaps, but when we look at the documented examples in the 70s in Çanakkale, in Bayramiç, in 2013 in Iznik, there were actually attempts to lynch certain Roma people. These were cases of collective violence, and the public officials fell short of intervening, and people were pushed away from where they lived. And in the Selendi incident, that only in that case particularly, the court recognized what happened. Now, how have state policies been shaped? Let's now take a look at that. As I said previously, these problems up until the 2000s, I mean, none of these problems were visible, but at the beginning of the 2000s, in line with Turkey's EU accession bid, this was put forward as a prerequisite. Minority rights, or respecting minorities, this was put on the agenda for Turkey, and the EU had a direct impact on Turkey's Roma policies. Just like Elmas indicated, the settlement law was replaced with an updated version, so discriminatory phraseologies were done away with. And in the directive for police officers, there were certain changes as well. Languages were changed, or laws were changed, and discriminatory language against the Roma were taken out of these pieces of legislation. And there was there were a series of initiatives in Turkey, and the Roma initiative was one of them, in addition to the Kurdish initiative. And the Roman civil society emerged as a result, and there was a draft document that was prepared, and the EU actually wanted Turkey to create a national strategic document and an action plan as well. But actually, for long years, this document was not made public. This policy was not adopted by the government until the visa liberalization process. As you would remember, at the time of Prime Minister Davutoğlu, this was a priority for the Davutoğlu government. And as part of the visa liberalization, one of the conditions for the EU was to launch these documents officially. And for the first time, the Roma, in the program of the 62nd and 64th government between 2014 and 16, these documents were published for the first time. Strategic documents and also the action plans were launched for the first time between the years of 16 and 21, but there was not an overlap with what the civil society prepared. This was a bit of a disappointment, and it was not budgeted. The budget was supposed to come from IPA2. There was this project called Siroma, and it was tied to that, and this was an EU project, and things were done quite quickly. There was a coup attempt in between as part of that project. Mediators were employed, studies were carried out, but the study design was under a lot of criticism, and the studies, I mean, there is no website of these studies. We don't know what the findings are. We have a difficult time accessing the outcomes of the study, and things happened really quickly. Some of the policies were to be maintained, it was said, but that was not the case. So the Roman civil society criticized all these factors. Now, when we talk about the Roman civil society, actually, this is quite interesting because up until 2004, the Roma or Roma/Gypsy, I mean, no association could use this word. So up until 2004, there were no formally established civil society orgs. But in 2020, we see that in 34 provinces, there are more than 36 such. No, correction, 336 orgs that were established, and there are different reasons why. If you're interested, maybe we can get to that in Q&A, but the fact that this number has gone up so much is because of the organization between the Roma, but also it created a lot of polarization as well, because the state, like I said previously, did certain things because of the EU anchor, and the Ministry of Family, knew nothing about these neighborhoods, Roma neighborhoods, so they wanted to use these orgs to penetrate into these neighborhoods, or through municipalities. They wanted to receive support and information as to what was going on in the neighborhoods, especially before the elections. AKP and CHP are the two parties that are favored by these civil society orgs, and again, the EU wants to increase political participation. This is always mentioned in the progress reports, and for the first time, an openly Roma MP was elected in 2015. In 2018, Cemal Bekle was elected as MP in Izmir, and this really increased the polarization. So either AKP or CHP, now that these two political parties had openly Roma MPs, but in 2023 there was no such Roma candidate fielded and or elected. And right now, I talked about the quote-unquote Europeanization period, but now we are going through a Europeanization period. What is the state doing at this time? What are the state policies? Actually, since 2020, an EU project has been running, but that's to raise awareness with public officials. It's not intended for the civil society. Since 21, on the 8th of April, the Roma Day is celebrated, observed. Certain organizations or certain events are organized, and finally, at the beginning of this year, in 2023, a strategic document was published for 7 years, and the first action plan was also published as well. And in addition to the goals set previously, localization is emphasized in this document, and there are certain interesting articles in this document. In the previous strategic document, we didn't have any of these, but it says here, the Directorate of Religious Affairs is to reach out to the Roma populations to offer pastoral services to them. So to establish units to bolster the family and support the youngsters in Roma neighborhoods. And one of the intended outcomes is to target youngsters and to make sure that they're youngsters who love their country and who have a sense of citizenship. And for Roma students, visits to the Çanakkale Memorial, for instance, is yet another outlined idea. But what is more interesting is organizing privacy meetings at Roma neighborhoods, but it doesn't say, the document doesn't say anything about the content of these trainings. So for the first time, we are seeing attempts to make sure that the Roma population embrace so-called local and national values. So as we have tried to summarize, the state's Roma policies have oscillated between overlooking them entirely and also trying to reshape them, remold them when the need arises. Thank you.
Çok teşekkür ediyoruz bu.
We would like to thank our both panelists for this excellent presentation. Our second panelist is İrfan Çağatay, and he will talk about Laz people in the centennial of the Republic of Turkey. He is a graduate of the Turkish language and literature at Marmara University in 2006, and he is one of the three authors of the last Turkish dictionary, and he is one of the editors and authors of Skaninena, which was published in Laz and Turkish languages, and he also worked as the editor-in-chief of Tanura, a Laz and Turkish magazine. He's one of the founders of the Lazika Publishing Collective. Since 2011, he has been carrying out various researches and panels about the last activist, Iskender Çiştaşi, who was killed in 1938. And he founded the newspaper Ağani Murutsi, the New Star newspaper, in 2013, which is the very first newspaper in Laz language. And he's currently preparing a publication, a book on Laz nationalism in the last periods of Ottoman Empire, which will be soon published by İletişim Publishing. Over to you, İrfan Çağatay. Good afternoon. First and foremost, I would like to thank the Hrant Dink Foundation for this insightful conference. I'm very sorry for my hoarse voice. I'm a little bit ill. Today I will be talking about a topic that everyone has some bits of information, but actually no one has full grasps of Laz people, their identity, and practices about Laz people. I have actually a very long paper, but I will not be reading it entirely. First, I would like to introduce you the Laz people, the Laz community. So they are living across the eastern Black Sea region, so on the coastline surrounded by the sea and mountains all the way to the border with Georgia. So they were settled in this area throughout history. They use the Laz language. This is a South Caucasian language. It is quite kin to the Georgian language. In Turkey, we don't have extensive knowledge about South Caucasian language because people would actually remember of the Caucasian languages in relation to Circassian. So these languages are mostly spoken in Georgia, and the Megrel language is quite similar. Some people actually describe Laz as the families or relatives, distant relatives of Megrels. So the Laz community, that they came under the Ottoman Empire with the fall of the Laz Empire, and they have lived in this area throughout the history, but of course under the mandate of Constantinople, and they were Islamized after the end of the 16th century. And in the last period of the Ottoman Empire, particularly together with the Ottoman-Russian War of 1877-78, this region constantly changed hands between the Ottoman and the Russian Empire. And Batumi was the main center of Lazistan, but this was captured by the Ottomans, so they actually relocated their capital to Rize, and they established the Sancak of Lazistan. So the Laz people, concerning their native language or themselves, they have not actually worked a lot on their identity, on their language. They have not really produced much about their language. But at some point, they established the Laz Student Society in Istanbul. that was established in Istanbul. And around this time, the area between Batumi and Hopa remained under the rule of the Russian Empire after 1877. So that's why in Hopa the last people got organized and they had more pro-Russian stance. And during the armistice periods, for the first time, they had the nationalist ideals. Ahmet Tevfik Bey, for instance, is from Fındıklı. Ahmet Tevfik Bey was the first one who talked about the right to self-determination, which was a highly debated topic at the time. So Ahmet Tevfik Bey proposed that the last people should also seek their right to self-determination. But we need to note that the last people did not have a very big population in the Ottoman Empire, so he cannot find many supporters for his idea. And then there is this Lazistan Freedom Committee. They actually organize among themselves, and in 1929, they published the very first Laz language newspaper, the Red Star. So this is the first written text in Laz language, Red Lazistan. Prior to that, the Laz people did not really record their culture in written language. Previously, there were some Europeans who tried to put the Laz language, and actually the first example was done by an Italian linguist in 1790. During the Soviet Union, there was a certain character, a communist person, Iskender. He is also a linguist and a pedagogy expert. So thanks to him, under Soviet Union rule in Abkhazia, he opens some schools in the 30s, particularly in Batumi and Skumi. So these are the schools providing education in Laz language. So these schools continue operation until 1938, but then Iskender Titash was executed because of a change of policy in the Soviet Union. And those people who were concentrating on Laz language, they were forcibly displaced to Siberia and further to Central Asia. And around the same time in Republic of Turkey, we had the Laz Student Society, and some of the societies in Batumi, they actually merged the Ottoman Lazistan and Russian Lazistan, and they formed an autonomous or independent Lazistan. They wanted to form, so this was an ideal formation of a greater Lazistan, but they couldn't succeed with their goal. They were silenced, they were oppressed before they could ever achieve that. So the Ottoman the last people within the Ottoman territories, they were confined into a great silence, and this continued until 1983. So between this period, between 1933 to 1984, we cannot really find much examples of researches or activities about the Laz people and the Laz language. And in 1984, we see a study from Germany. Some of the Laz people who migrated to Germany as a guest worker, they start writing in Laz language. So they make some efforts and they publish a Laz alphabet in Germany, and this comes to Turkey around 1990s. So in 1993 they have this Laz Renaissance, but only the Laz people know about this Renaissance and not the rest of the world. So there was this so-called Laz Renaissance. For the first time they started publishing a magazine in Laz language. They also make attempts to form an association, but of course the political circumstances of the time, there was not really quite enabling. But they could still move forward with the journal, and they organized picnics, gatherings, music. Of course, many people would remember the music bands where Kazım Koyuncu was a member, Zugashi. And with the rise of the social media, we can see more activities by Laz people, because previously the Laz people were more active in Istanbul. This is where the Laz community concentrated. But with the social media, people also started to focus on Laz language in other parts of Turkey. So from the 1990s to this day, we had mostly 70 books published in Laz language, at most. Of course, we're talking about a tiny group. This is a very tiny group, perhaps 500,000 or 600,000. This is my estimate, by the way. Of course, we cannot really know because there is no census data. So even if we consider the Laz population to be 600,000, again, only a tiny minority knows and speaks the Laz language. And the number of people who are self-aware of their Laz identity is even smaller, I would say. Only a smaller group has this awareness about their identity. Until the census of 1960s, the Laz people would also be asked their native language, and 64,000 Laz expressed that their native tongue was the Laz language. This was the case during the 60s. But the government recognized the Laz language only in 2013 when elective courses were introduced. Only during this time, the government, the Ministry of Education, made a statement for Kurdish, Zazaki. So the ministry declared to open elective courses in Kurdish, Zazaki, and Laz language, but ultimately these courses in Laz language did not materialize. And of course, there was a certain reaction, and some community members prepared textbooks in Laz language, and they could also start these courses, but they remained as private courses. I have to mention that there are only very few people attending these classes, so only limited to 5, 6, or 10 classes opened. And after 2018, there were very few classes opened. And as of today, we have very few classes offering Laz language classes. And of course, these Laz language courses could be opened thanks to the initiatives of the teachers, because it's actually not an easy task to open an elective course on last language. And this is not only the case for last language, by the way. So we can see a peak in the number of elective courses in other native tongues, but towards 2018, we see that there's a significant decline. Of course, we're talking about last community living in Istanbul, but then there are also, we need to talk about other cities. The role of women, especially with the contribution of social media, more and more women are now writing in their native tongue. They write literary texts. But unfortunately, the language cannot be transferred to the next generation. So we cannot actually transfer our language to our children. And I believe that in the coming century, the last language does not really have a bright future. When a star wanes, you might just see the brightest moment of that star, but it will ultimately wane. Yes, we also had this peak period where we had a lot of lost publications coming out, but of course sustainability or continuity is quite important. In order to ensure continuity in last language usage and publications, you need more and more people who are able to speak the language. So that's the reason why we don't have a very bright picture here. Of course, there can be some affirmative action measures in order to support that, and that's all I want to say. Thank you very much for your attention. We would like to thank our panelists for this great presentation.
If I understood well, yes. Dr. Victoria Arakelova, the title of her presentation is The Yezidi Issue in Turkey. Dr. Victoria Arakelova is a professor at the Institute of Oriental Studies in Russian Armenian University in Yerevan. She is also co-founder and associate editor of Iran and the Caucasus International Journal. She graduated from the Faculty of Oriental Studies, Iranian Studies Department at Yerevan State University in 1998 and completed her PhD on Comparative Religious Studies, the Yezidi Pantheon, I think it's the title of the dissertation, in 2003. Between 1999 and 2015, she worked as an associate professor at the Department of Iranian Studies at Yerevan State University. Since 2015, she has been a professor at the Russian Armenian University in Yerevan. She is the author and co-author of several monographs, such as The Religion of Malak Tavus, The Spirit World of the Yezidis, published in 2014, or Ethnocultural Others of Turkey, published in Yerevan in 2021, and of course numerous articles on the Near Eastern non-dogmatic milieu, South Caspian contact zone, and ethno-religious identities. Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
I would like to, first of all, express my gratitude to the Randing Foundation, the organizer of this remarkable event, which I personally would characterize as one of the most topical initiatives and one of the most interesting and, in terms of its scholarly content, academic events. It's an honor and pleasure to be invited here and to present a paper on probably one of the most stigmatized as devil worshippers and thus most vulnerable communities in a huge area, not only in Turkey, but also in the historical motherland of the Yezidis, northern Iraq, Mosul. That is why, speaking on the Yezidi issue in Turkey, we have to constantly refer to a wider region, particularly to the cross-border zones of Turkey, Syria, and Iraq. Besides taking into account that Yezidism, as phenomenon is among the least investigated and enigmatic ethno-religious systems, I will have to also focus on some general elements of the subject. The Yezidiya, or in Kurmanji SD, it's a Kurmanji-speaking ethno-religious group, have for centuries been part of the variegated map of the Ottoman Empire and then the Republic of Turkey. Despite numerous attestations of the Yezidis in various sources from medieval times, the community life of these people, their identity and culture have long remained among the least investigated problems. Apart their historical motherland, the northern Iraq, northwest Mosul and Jebel Sinjar, west of Mosul, currently the Yezidis are also found in Syria, eastern Turkey, Armenia, Georgia, as well as in Russia and Europe. Almost the entire Yezidi population of Turkey, based previously in a compact settlement in the rural centers of Turabdin, Nisibin, Diyarbakir, Mush, Sassun, and Bitlis, as well as on the upper shores of the Tigris River, has moved to Syria, Germany, or other Western European countries. Discussing the distribution of the Yezidis in Turkey, the catalogue of the ethnic groups in the Republic of Turkey mentions dozens of the Yezidi villages in the frontier provinces bordering on Syria and Iraq, in particular in Mardin, around 25 villages, Urfa, 24 villages, Sirt, 14 villages, Diyarbakir, 4 villages, Gaziantep, 4 villages, and Adiyaman, 2 villages. According to the data presented by the Yezidi Verein in Hanover, 121 Yezidi villages in the region have been destroyed or taken over by their Muslim neighbors in the recent past. Generally, the statistics on the Yezidis are among the most problematic issues. Their concrete numbers have been almost never available. In various censuses, they have often been counted with other religious groups, ethnic or religious or ethnic groups. For example, in the census of the Russian Empire of 1914, the Yezidis of Western Armenia are counted together with the Kazalbashis, while in most of the Soviet censuses of population, except those of 1926 and 1989, the Yezidis of Armenia and Georgia as Kurmanji speakers were identified as Kurds, what naturally seriously distorts the whole picture and presents no reliable figures. Nowadays, the total number of the Yezidis can be approximately estimated to be around 450,000 people. In Iraq and Syria, without taking into consideration mass migration caused by the current Near Eastern crisis, correspondingly around 200,000 and up to 100,000. In Armenia, about 45,000. In Georgia, about 25,000. Russia, from 15 to 20,000. Western Europe, from 50 to 60,000. All in all, not more than 500,000 people. There is no approximate data on the Yezidis of today's Turkey. The Turkish demographic profile of Index Mundi 2019, apart from proper Turks, indicates 19% of the Kurds and from 7 to 12% of other ethnic minorities represented in the country. In terms of religious identity, the source mentions only 0.2% of minorities, mainly Christian and Jews, versus 99.8% of Muslims. In relevant research, information on the Yezidis as a minority in Turkey is also missing. The pro-Kurdish Peace and Democracy Party deputy Ayla Ata gave the figure of only 400 Yezidis currently living in Turkey. Mass migrations and disappearance of whole Yezidi villages have no chance to reconstruct any figure based on the number of villages and their dwellers either. The Yezidis speak Northern Kurdish dialect Kurmanji, but they themselves call their language Ezdeki, the Yezidi language, thus emphasizing their peculiar identity. The Yezidi society is a closed endogamous community with a caste system consisting of the three main components: the clergy, including the castes of the sheikhs and pirs, and the layman murid. Other castes like Kochak, Fakirs, Kawals, Farash, and Kebani have particular functions in the context of the temple service. Most of the Yazidis lead the sedentary life of cattle breeders. The religion of the Yazidis is a unique product of the Near Eastern non-dogmatic milieu, rooted in mystical Islam, but later having totally dissociated itself from the Muslim milieu and became a basis for a principally new ethno-religious identity. Its eccentricity, manifested in numerous non-dogmatic peculiarities, brought the Yazidis the disrepute of heretics and even devil worshippers, and actually doomed the community to constant persecutions in the Muslim environment. The Yazidis themselves call their syncretic religion Sharfadin. They classify it as monotheism, a belief in only one God, Huade, and his manifestations, the Holy Triad of Malak Taus, the Peacock Angel, Sheikh Hadi and Sultan Yezid. This holy triad coexists with the folk pantheon of deities, holy men, and patrons. The latter are rather elements of popular religion preserved by many Near Eastern peoples than the ground for polytheism. Grouping a niche for Yezidism on the Near Eastern religious map, one should pay particular attention to some of its common features with various segments of non-dogmatic environment. First of all, the heterodox Shia milieu. Dogmatic Shia elements are surprisingly preserved in the tradition as well. The obvious Sufi heritage is, in many cases, reinterpreted in accordance with the proper Yezidi doctrine. The Gnostic content, presents on different levels, requires specific analysis. It is the specific religious doctrine confessed exclusively by the Yazidis determines the basic marker of the Yazidi unique identity. The identity issues remaining also among the most crucial and at the same time problematic for the Yazidi community wherever they live. It is mainly related to the irrelevant definition of the Yazidis as a Kurdish tribe or just as Kurds, despite the fact of often persecution, particularly in the Kurdish environment. Yazidis are an illustrative example of an ethno-religious identity which is based on the unique religious system and specific features solely characteristic of the Yazidi esoteric community. That is, for example, the religious institution of the brother and the sister of the next world, or some others. The Yazidi community is called the Ezdikhana, the adobe of the Yazidis. Once an esoteric term, it is used now as general opposition to other communities, Sirman, Muslims, Filah, Christians, etc. They are specific parameters of belonging to Ezdikhana, which are determined by Farz-e Bratia, the canon of spiritual guidance, confirming itself to certain major prescriptions. The closed endogamous character of the Ezdikhana, which has provided a strong drive to ethnicity and shaped the new identity with a particular ethnic and religious markers. The Yazidi say, Melataman Ezdi, Dinaman Sharfadin. My nation is Yazidi, my faith is Sharfadin. And sometimes adding Zimaneman Ezdiki, my language is Ezdiki, that is the Yazidi language. This formula can be regarded as kind of the Yazidi credo, incorporating the main aspects of the group identity. Discussing the Yazidism in its current state, it is appropriate to speak of the unity of the Yazidi religious belonging and their ethnicity, typical of any ethno-religious group whose self-awareness is primarily based on a non-proselyte religion practiced exclusively within the given closed community, like Druzes or Mandians. As much as Yazidism, as Weltanschauung, determines the general definition of its carriers, the Yazidis, to the same extent, it can be determined by the virtue of the latter. Formulating the main identity markers of the Yazidis, we should take into account that the first two of them are definition ex negatio, ex negation, what is typical of the closed ethno-religious community, having dissociated through their history from particular religious and ethnic environments. Thus, the Yazidis should be characterized as non-Muslim, the religious differentiating characteristics, not Kurds, the ethnic differentiating characteristics, and then as the people of Malak Tavus, for example, this figure actually providing the uniqueness of the cult and one of the community's eponym, the people or the lambs of Sultan Yezid, Barghe Sultan Yezid, The letter is not only representing a member of the Yezidi Holy Triad, but also extending his name to the main eponym of the community. The members of Yezdihana, and therefore the bearers of the esoteric religious doctrine, Sharfadin, and the adherents of the unique code of Farz-e Bratiye. While discussing the Yezidis issue in Turkey, we should approach the issue wider, taking into account the situation in the cross-border zones and sometimes the whole Near Eastern region. Besides, the diachronic view should be also taken into consideration, since it's an essential part of the analysis. Most of the current problems are definitely rooted in the past and are results of century-long pejorative definitions and cliches applied to the Yazidis in the Muslim milieu. The distrustful look of the traditional milieu at sectarians gave birth to numerous derogatory cliches, many of them having survived to nowadays and being employed in various parts of the Yazidi dwelling regions, in Turkey as well. Forming established usages, they often erroneously and broadly characterize quite different sects, but first of all the Yazidis. Full of prejudice accusations are the reports of various missions representatives and notes of travelers. Most of the latter refer, as a rule, to the improbable stories about the sectarians told by neighboring communities. Very often, among the accused were the Yazidis, and the charges applied to the group can be conditionally divided into two parts. First is the breaking of the common Sharia rules and prescriptions, for example, eating unallowed, haram food, drinking wine, non-observance of the Muslim Lent, etc. Most of these charges sound quite reasoned, taking into account that we deal with a group having dissociated itself from Islam centuries ago and acquired its own quite specific religious code and mode of behavior. The second most widespread accusation, a very peculiar one, is of orgies and promiscuity, which has nothing to do with reality and represents a common cliché applied to numerous esoteric sects in the East. For example, at heterodox Shia groups. Apart from the common clichés, the Yazidis through centuries used to bear the epithet of devil worshippers. These imputations of devil worshipping stem from the cult of Malak Tavus, the central figure in the Yazidi pantheon, their character joining both the features of a deity and the fallen angel. Night ceremonies dedicated to the Lord of Darkness, whose descriptions are next to impossible, used to be attributed to the Yazidis as well. At the same time, the tolerance of the Yazidis themselves should be specially mentioned. The Yazidis' morning prayer is more than illustrative here. O Lord, come to help the 72 peoples, to all those oppressed and tribulated, to prisoners and the poor, and only after that help us, the Yazidis. Yet the above-mentioned accusations, particularly that of devil worshipping, are still widespread, and they are easily turned into a kind of justification both for the severe persecutions by extremists and negative and aggressive attitude of the Yazidi neighbors. Some of the most dramatic episodes of the Yazidi persecutions were perpetrated by the Ottoman and the Young Turks. The first mass exodus of the Yazidis from Turkey occurred between 1915 and 1918, when, as a result of massacres by both the Turkish states and the majority of Kurdish tribes of the Hamidian regiment, the Yazidis who inhabited the border territories left the country and found refuge in Armenia and Georgia. The Yazidis' second exodus from Turkey started in the late 1980s and early 1990s, when tens of thousands of Yazidis living mainly in Urfa, Mardin, Batman and Diyarbakir, again under the heavy oppression of both the states and the Kurdish neighbors, were forced to seek refuge in Europe, while many of them were just gradually pushed from Turkey to Syria. Many of the Yazidi villages of the Turkey-Syria borders were deserted, while the most dramatic result of this move is that very soon, with the emergence of the ISIS, the same groups of the Yazidis appeared to be in a hard situation already in the Syrian land. The Peace and Democracy Party deputy Ayla Katata says that some laws passed by the Ottoman authorities are still applied to the Yazidis. In official documents, they are registered as Muslims or non-believers. The Yazidis are often dispossessed of their lands by their neighbors with the connivance of local authorities. Sometimes owners cannot get their land back, even despite the decision of restriction by some courts. In April 2014, the parliamentarian raised the issue also in the context of the securing the right to return to Turkey and to receive compensation for their losses for those Yazidis who had left the country with the second wave of the exodus. Yet the situation since then has dramatically changed to the worse, as the Near Eastern crisis deepened with the rapid spread of influence of the terrorist militant organization of the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant. The Yazidis have turned to be among the most vulnerable groups in all the countries the current war in the Near East has touched. In fact, all the territories of the Yazidi historical residents are within the dominant Islamic population. The Islamic surveillance policy aimed to subjugate the civilian under its control and dominate every aspect of their lives through terror and indoctrination, has resulted in a whole range of crimes committed against these ethno-religious groups: forced conversion to Islam, slavery and massacres, as well as destruction of shrines and annihilations of villages. Stigmatized, the Yazidis, alongside with the extremely negative attitude of their own Muslim neighbors, had to face brutal persecution and mass killings by the Islamic State's terrorist group in the territories covered by hostilities, particularly in Iraq, Syria, Turkey cross borders. I am omitting some facts as well. The situation with the Yazidi refugees in Turkey awaiting their chance to flee to Europe is not less dramatic. In Near Eastern region, which for centuries has been home for the Yazidis, the latter have remained kind of unwelcome neighbors for their surrounding, even in a more or less peaceful period of history. The current turbulent phase the region seemed to go through will definitely result in a crucial change of its ethno-religious map, including the Yazidi segment. This still ongoing confrontation process constantly increases the existential risks for the Yazidi community and the local level of such risks, which is sometimes determined by an insignificant factor as mere neighborhood, may result in the most dramatic peripeteia. Numerous reports of international organizations and researchers of the subject abound with terrific details, both in terms of general analysis of the situation and case studies, interviews. Constant migration of the Yazidis has resulted in a kind of a never-ending process which does not allow these people to finally settle and become an organic part of the milieu they have belonged for centuries. Mass migration, necessity of adaptation to principally new environment, challenges of globalization, all may result in serious transformation in the tradition and the formation of the new syncretic forms of the Yazidi identity. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Victoria, for this very interesting presentation.